Have you ever heard of aphasia? A person with aphasia isn't able to speak or understand speech properly. The condition comes with many different variations, which are almost all caused by damage to certain parts of the brain. Being able to understand what aphasia is and why it occurs, we first have to know about how communication works in the brain. There are two parts of the brain that are credited with controlling how a person is able to communicate. The first is called Wernicke's area after the physician Carl Wernicke, and the second is called Broca's area after the physician Paul Broca. Both of these areas reside in the left side of the brain, as the left side of the brain is the dominant side for most people. This was discovered just after World War II by Dr. Jun Atsushi Wada, using an anesthetic called Emitol to numb one side of the brain to see if the patient stopped responding properly to communication. With this discovery, scientists were able to locate Wernicke's area and Broca's area and eventually figure out the general cause of aphasia. First, we'll look at Wernicke's area. It's located in the posterior section of the brain between the auditory and visual cortex. Its main function is to comprehend language. Its abilities include being able to communicate coherent ideas, whether it's written, vocal, or signed. It is connected to Broca's area by the arcuate fasciculus. Broca's area is also located in the posterior section of the brain between the pars triangularis and the pars opocularis. To think of it in simple terms, it is right behind Wernicke's area. While Wernicke's area is in charge of comprehending communication, Broca's area controls the production of speech. It is involved in planning, controlling, and executing speech, as it's located near the motor cortex, as well as involved in the formulation of sounds. Located between the Broca's area and Wernicke's area is the arcuate fasciculus, which is equally as important in communication as it's what the main two areas transfer information over. It is made of white matter fibers and extends from the posterior region of the temporal lobe to the posterior region of the inferior prefrontal lobe and plays an important role in connecting Broca's area and Wernicke's area. The status of the arcuate fasciculus also determines how well a person is able to repeat language. Now that we know the main parts of the brain that are involved in the communication process, we need to know how they communicate with each other. Neurons are what the brain uses to communicate from one part to another. They are the nerve cells of the brain. These cells are structured in a similar fashion to regular cells of the body, only that they have an aspect that allows them to transmit signals at a long distance. There are three basic parts to neurons: the cell body, the axon, and the dendrites. They also collect electromagnetic signals, and after doing so, they transmit them between different parts of the brain. The cell body is the main part of the neuron housing all the basic components of a cell. It contains the nucleus, which directs all the neuron's activity, as well as other basic parts of a cell, such as the mitochondria, which produces energy. As with anything else, ATP energy is needed in order for the cell to perform its job of gathering and transferring signals. Adenosine triphosphate is a purine base attached to a pencil sugar, which are all attached to three phosphates. When a phosphate is removed, energy is released for the neuron to perform its work. Connected to the cell body is the axon, which carries the action potential or nerve impulse electrochemical message along the length of the cell to the dendrites. The neuron's dendrites serve as the nerve endings, allowing for connections and perception of environment around the cell. Using neurons, Wernicke's area and Broca's area are able to pass information and communicate through the arcuate fasciculus. The neurons also send signals to the larynx, tongue, mouth, and other motor areas through Broca's area. With the knowledge we have of these three areas, we can begin to understand what causes aphasia. Damage to the language areas of the brain often result in aphasia. The most common cause is a stroke, which occurs when blood is destructed from vital parts of the brain. Lesions, brain tumors, or infections may also cause aphasia. Aphasia may also derive from dementia. Generally, any trauma on the head or skull has this possibility of inducing aphasia. There are three main types of aphasia: expressive, receptive, and conduction aphasia. The severity of aphasia depends on how badly that area of the brain is damaged. The type of disorder that results from the damage depends on where it is located. Expressive aphasia results from damage around the Broca's area. With expressive aphasia, sufferers are non-fluent. He or she is unable to speak or copy sounds, yet they are still able to understand language because their cognitive function is still intact. Comprehension is only mildly or moderately impaired. They are aware of their own disability. With receptive aphasia, the trauma is located around the vernix area. The person has no trouble speaking or producing sounds, but they lack coherence. Receptive aphasia renders the person unable to comprehend when spoken to, read to, and in general unable to understand any means of communication. The patient does not know they have the disability. Conduction aphasia is the result of impairment to the arcuate fasciculus between the Wernicke's area and Broca's area. Patients with conduction aphasia have an auditory perception that is intact and is still capable of speech generation, but they have poor speech repetition. Produce sentences with true meaning or repeat words heard or read. 10% of Americans suffer from aphasia. They are unable to communicate with the rest of society. It is important to support the research of treatments and support organizations that aid people with aphasia, such as the National Aphasia Organization. Thank you for watching.